It was seen as a test of religious harmony, both for Indonesia's capital and the country as a whole. The race for Jakarta's governorship hasn't gone smoothly. Mass rallies led by hardline groups have called for the incumbent Basuki Cahayapurnama, known popularly as Ahok, to be jailed.
Tangkap Ahok, karena emang apalagi sekarang sudah dibuktikan dia sudah menjadi tersangka.
One in November turned violent. Ahok, an ethnic Chinese Christian, faces blasphemy charges for citing a passage from the Quran last September. He says it was an attempt to dispel the notion among some that Muslims aren't religiously permitted to vote for non-Muslims. Ahok's supporters say that the rallies were planned by his political opponents to sabotage his campaign. Before the protests, Ahok had been polling as high as 52%, which would have clinched the February election outright. Instead, he won the first round with 43%, and now has likely lost to his Muslim runoff opponent, Anies Baswedan, a former Minister of Education and Culture. An unofficial count suggests Baswedan has won. An official tally is expected to be released by the first week of May. Ahok's trial resumes Thursday, the day after the vote. If convicted of blasphemy, he could be sentenced up to 5 years in prison. Issues like Jakarta's chronic flooding, a lack of reliable public transport, and inadequate public housing have played a part in the campaign. But religion and ethnicity have overshadowed the race from the beginning. And with Ahok's possible prosecution looming, some fear those behind the passionate protests that stained his campaign will only be emboldened. Randolph Noble, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Jakarta is Tobias Basuki. He's a researcher at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Good to talk to you, Tobias. So, Ahok losing, is that a surprise?
Yes, it was a surprise. Of course, after the first round, the conventional wisdom tells that Anies was the front runner, although he was only the runner-up on the result of the first round of elections. But the fact that the margin is about 16 percentage points is definitely a surprise, because Ahok was a very capable and high-performing governor. So that was definitely a surprise to me.
Was this election about politics, or was it about religion and identity?
Of course, on the surface, it looks very much like religion, but in reality, it was politicized religion. It was very clear it's about politics, and it was about entrenched political economic interests against the incumbent governor Ahok, but also against actually the national government. So what we have seen, the huge protests against incumbent governor Ahok in November and December, and leading up to this second round of election where Ahok lost, we can clearly see how religion had been heavily politicized to undermine the credibility and the electability of a governor with a high approval rating of up to 70%.
Yeah, and I want to come back to that, the blasphemy trial and the claims of blasphemy and the millions who had marched against him, because that's not over. And I want to ask you, was he a good governor?
Yes, overall, I think he was a good governor. Of course, he was not perfect, but as a bureaucrat and transforming the bureaucracy of Jakarta in ways never done before, he was actually excellent. He improved the efficiency of the bureaucracy, transparency of the Jakarta budget, development was moving by leaps and bounds. Of course, he had some weaknesses, including the forced evictions of the quartered people of a lower economic class at some regions because of the flooding. So that was part of his weakness. But overall, he was actually a very high-performing governor within the 2 years that he led, compared to even all other previous governors.
And what can we look forward to with Anies at the helm?
That would be definitely interesting to look at. I don't think there would be any drastic change with Anies taking the seat in October. In terms of programs and policies, they're quite similar with a few small exceptions. but Anies was always adding a plus to Ahok's program, which means often cash disbursement and other things. So two key questions on Anies would be, can he effectively govern the way Ahok did, and can he actually curb corruption the way Ahok did? And the last part is actually whether all his program promises are sustainable, because a lot of economists are saying that it is not economically feasible. That's on the program and policies. But in regards to how politics and religion is run as an after effect of this election, that's another case. That would be the bigger problem, I would see.
Yeah, and given that Jakarta is the beating heart of Indonesia, what sort of impact will this have on the national politics in the country?
Yes, there's, I think, two rather long-term, well, medium-term and long-term impacts. We will have the next regional elections in 2018, which includes West Java gubernatorial seat, which is the biggest province in Indonesia, Central Java, East Java, and other regions, and included that will lead up to the 2019 presidential election. And definitely the results of this election has been a steep learning curve for politicians and political parties in Indonesia, that actually utilizing sectarian issues, primordial religious and ethnicity narratives, black campaigns, has proven to be effective even against an incumbent governor who has actually proven a track record and high approval rating in his job as governor. So that's the bad part, that this type of narrative will continue on to the other regions. And the longer term effect is actually the narrative of Islamist radicals that are trying to co-opt Indonesian political Islam may gain further ground. That is completely opposite of Indonesian Islam. For example, in this case, the legitimacy of a non-Muslim governor. That's something that has never been a problem in Indonesia, but it is now. And
you know, 7 million people took to the streets to protest against Ahok for alleged blasphemy. And I guess, you know, some voters might not have been one of those people out on the streets, but they might have thought, hey, I might not want to vote for somebody who could end up in jail because there wasn't a verdict yet, so maybe I'm going to play it safe and vote for Anies. With that in mind, what can we expect in terms of a verdict? Is Ahok going to end up in prison?
Well, first of all, there were actually, it was a misnomer. The candidate Anies Baswedan claimed also a wrong number. 7 million was not the number. It was actually more like less than 400,000. So that being said, of course, the court verdict, not the verdict yet, but the charges by the prosecution, which comes up tomorrow, will be very, very heavily influenced by this actually outcome. And the fact that Ahok lost will probably prove that most likely the prosecution will charge at a higher level, at a higher sentence. But that being said, there's a lot that will still happen. The processing of the further evidence and court battle will be ongoing, which until now the blasphemy charge against Ahok had been very done in a very rapid manner, which is unusual. Blasphemy court cases usually take up to 2 years. So after this, it's going to be an elongated further court trial after the charges are made. And that will prove that it will be less heated than before the gubernatorial election.
And I was reading reports that in the neighborhoods of Jakarta, there were banners claiming that Muslims who vote for Ahok will be denied burial rights. And, you know, there were all sorts of sort of hidden, you know, and not so hidden threats. In many ways, it made his point for him. The very thing that he said that got him in trouble, it essentially made his point for him. So some people have lit the flame of religious tension here. Is it going to be easy to extinguish that?
It's not going to be easy. Of course, I think so-called the fear of extreme radical Islamism is, I think, not too big of a threat, because there are small groups in Indonesia. But the fact that the narrative that they had used had been proven effective is where it's hard. Now, actually, the majority of the Indonesian Muslims and Jakartan Muslims who are actually pluralist and open-minded has been further pushed back using this kind of narratives, this kind of threats of not praying for those who voted for Ahok, and threats of other things, of religious threats, which Anies Baswedan, by the way, did say quite outrightly, explicitly the day before the election and also today.
Is Indonesia still a country where Indonesians who are Christian or Indonesians of Chinese descent can campaign and feel they have a chance of winning?
Well, we had a much progress after the '98 Reformation, and I don't think it changes much now. But definitely, there's more pessimism. I think people of minority, whether ethnicity or religion, in various areas, will be much more less optimistic in their chances precisely because of this. If someone with such a proven record can be taken down, what about someone who actually has no track record yet? That's going to be very tough. So that's the biggest challenge that we will face further into the future.
Fascinating times in Indonesia. We don't cover Indonesia often enough, and I hope we do in the future. It's been good to talk to you, Tobias Basuki, joining us there.